So, please join me in welcoming, virtually, Toast co-founder and president, Steve Fredette.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me.
Hey Steve, thanks for joining us.
It was great to be able to see the last session. I didn't catch all of the entrepreneurs, but I got Anja's section, and it was inspiring. So that was awesome. And I think, you know, I've been on vacation this week, so that's why I'm here virtually. I would have liked to have joined you all in person and said hello. But I like to read books on vacation, and this time I was reading a book called The Ride of a Lifetime. I don't know if you've heard of this one, but it was by Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, and it was about his career. And one of the things he says is that no one wants to follow a pessimist. So this works for the biggest businesses in the world like Disney, and also works for startups. I think passion and optimism are words that come to mind for me. And I think you get both of those from Anj. Not to mention all of his rules were great. But if there's one thing that I took away from that session was, wow, that was cool. That was just really cool. The passion and the optimism that he exudes is infectious. Like I want to follow him, right? And I think I remember early members of our team saying the same thing. They said, you know, like you've just got this passion for the business you're in, and the way you talk about it, you exude that confidence and passion. And that doesn't mean optimism, by the way. It doesn't mean you don't have realism. It doesn't mean you don't have self-doubt. And you know, everybody has some amount of imposter syndrome. But optimism, I think, is super important. So I think that's my one word for you.
Totally, thank you.
So Steve, can you tell us, where did your entrepreneurial journey begin?
Well, for me, it began sort of, I guess, before MIT. In some sense, I was always sort of curious and learning. And you know, my quote in my high school yearbook was, "Never let formal education get in the way of your learning," something like that. I was thinking of a Mark Twain quote. And I sort of meant that, and in that I had been very self-taught on computers. I'd learned to program early on. And I would say that was sort of an entrepreneurial thing, even though I hadn't been really thinking about starting companies at the time. But I would agree with Anj. When I got to MIT, I was surrounded by really smart people and really motivated people. My roommate had started a company in high school. He was running a company, actually all virtually and remotely. And all of his employees around the US didn't even know he was in high school. So I thought that was kind of funny. He had like 7 or 8 people that worked for him full time that had no idea he was a high schooler. So I found his energy and entrepreneurial, you know, passion to be infectious as well. And he went on to start his own company as well. But we were at MIT when Facebook was around. And so even before Facebook came out, if you remember, MySpace or Friendster were the big social networks, I guess, at the time. And we thought they weren't that great. And so we said, we can do better. Let's make something that just connects college students in the area. And we created a website called wickedparty.com, which was really a horrible name. So this has now become my lesson in branding. But the idea was to connect local college students. And we had a bunch of friends at BU and a bunch of friends at Northeastern and BC and Tufts. And we ended up starting this website and creating profiles with images and everything at 12 or 13 different Boston colleges, maybe even more than that. And then Facebook came to MIT, and they were at the time, you know, very exclusive, only Ivy League schools. But when they got to MIT, they spread really fast. So we said, oh, wow, this is a much better idea. It's, I mentioned that high school yearbook, actually. To me, the brilliance of the Facebook.com was it was like the equivalent of the high school yearbook. And how many people don't put their photo in the high school yearbook? I mean, you know, some small percentage of the high school population, but most people do. And so all of a sudden now you're in college, well, I got to have my photo in here. It's the Facebook. How can I not be listed and not be kind of counted in this thing? So it was brilliant. And I thought it was really well named and branded. And then even things like the poke were brilliant. It was just sort of flirty without being flirty. Like you kind of could poke anyone, and it wasn't, you know, kind of innocuous, but it was fun. And it really, I think, captured you know, real human social interaction in digital platforms. So I think Mark Zuckerberg, you got to give him a lot of credit for that. And also for he took it seriously. We didn't take it seriously. He dropped out, we didn't. But anyway, when it came to MIT, we then copied it. In 2 weeks, we're like, this is a better idea than ours. We created an exact clone, and we called ours collegefaces.com, which was not much better a name. But we then launched it at all the other Boston schools that we were already at. And I think we also had University of Michigan, University of North Carolina. And Zuckerberg finds out and he sends my roommate an instant message over AIM, if you remember AIM, Instant Messenger. And he's like, basically, cease and desist, like you guys copied our website. We really did. We had the same banner image, the same logo, like the same colors, same buttons, everything was exactly cloned. So he wasn't entirely wrong. But I guess there's probably illegal to Anja's point about whatever it was, respecting authority. And so he said, why don't you come join us? And we would have been like the 5th and 6th employees of Facebook. And we said, nah, screw you, we're going to compete with you. But we forced Facebook to launch at all of the Boston schools, and much faster than I think they might have otherwise. And then, like I said, he quit and went full time, and we didn't. So, but that really got us the entrepreneurial bug. And from then on in, we said we want to be entrepreneurs.
And so, what do you recommend entrepreneurs focus on to become successful?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot to learn, certainly. So build the skill set you have. This conference, obviously, attending conferences like this, I spent a lot of time at startup conferences trying to learn about the entrepreneurial journey. I like if you can do a program, like Anj mentioned, like learning the entrepreneurial language. I spent a lot of time reading entrepreneurial, the equivalent of TechCrunch at the time. I can't remember what it was called, but I read a lot of articles, read a lot of stuff. And just sort of that got me into the entrepreneurial language, and then networked. I spent a lot of time meeting other VCs, trying to meet other entrepreneurs, learn from that. And then I read a lot. I read a lot of books. I knew I didn't want to go to business school. I wanted to jump into something myself, but I didn't have a business foundation. I was a chemistry major, so I started reading about accounting and strategy and management and so on. And I think that was helpful. And then it was about the idea. I think someone said, earlier, like ideas are cheap. I mean, I would absolutely agree with that. Execution is important, but you got to start with an idea, and you got to start somewhere. And so I got some advice at one point early on, I think, that I would give back to you all. I mean, you got to be in a space that's like changing. Like you got to be at the edge of some frontier of change in the world, right? Like that, because if you're going to start a business, not to say you can't be successful. And someone used the example of starting a gas station, right? You want to start a chain of gas stations. You could do it, but you got to be really good at execution, because to be good at that business is all about squeezing out super efficient operations of gas stations across the country, right? Like that's a hard business to be really good at. There's not a lot of fundamental change that's happening, although maybe you could argue now with electrification, that's a trend, but that's a trend. So, what's going on in the world that you're trying to follow? And that could be a tech trend like AI right now, which is driving so many things like autonomous vehicles or robotics. With anything that's related to computer vision is fundamentally AI. So whether that's augmented reality or virtual reality or facial recognition, all of these things are sort of AI based, not just about machine learning. But it could be social change. And they were talking about this in the Disney book as well, when they bought Marvel and they launched Captain Marvel and Black Panther. And the prevailing wisdom from the entire Marvel management team was that'll never work. International audiences, won't watch a movie, with a primarily Black cast. It's just not going to work. And the CEO of Disney said, I don't care. Like the world's changing, right? Like the times are different. And it was a phenomenal success. Both movies grossed over $1 billion at the box office. And I think Black Panther was like the 4th all-time highest grossing movie in Disney's history when it was launched. So, I think that's a major change in the world. Social change is a thing that you can pay attention to as well. But you got to pay attention to a change. And so for Toast, we got really lucky in that regard, because we ended up finding the intersection of a whole bunch of different trends. So one, software as a service was transforming the whole software industry. So instead of buying your software upfront, you would buy it on a month-to-month basis. That was a small change. Seems like a small change, but it was really impactful to our customers. It meant for restaurants, instead of having to have a computer in the back office, which they could only access mostly when they were in person, unless they had logged in, if you remember that application. Now they could be at home. They could be on vacation. They could be with their families. In the restaurant industry, it's a 24/7 business. Spending a little bit more time at home or on the beach is an amazing thing. And so being able to get access to reports or configure the system from anywhere because you're on the internet, because it's a software as a service model, that was a really big thing for our customers at the time. But we also took advantage of mobile tablets. So instead of having traditional PC-based systems, we were building on Android. which meant we could tap into commodity, supply chains for millions and millions of consumer devices rather than say hundreds of thousands of POS devices for restaurants. So we were able to tap into that hardware trend. I also think that tablets generally were bringing computing to huge sections of the workforce that, were not desk workers. So desk workers for the last 40 years or 30 years, computing software has helped make their jobs much more efficient and effective. But for mobile workers, that wasn't the case. So all of a sudden now you see tablets in nurses and doctors' hands, in construction workers, and there's a company called Procore that went public recently that just focuses on construction workers. In restaurants, restaurants are mobile workers. So there's all sorts of different mobile workers that tablets could now be carrying around with them. And we've been very successful shipping handhelds to our customers where they can hold the tablet at the table, take your order at the table, take your payment right at the table. And I would say we've been a pioneer of that. If you go to a restaurant, see a handheld at the table, it's very likely a Toast device that we produce. So handhelds were another big thing. Fintech was another one. The rise of sort of embedding financial services into software. There's this quote, software is eating the world, right? And I think that's probably true. And so the disruption of banks, you no longer need to go to a bank branch. Bank branches don't provide much value anymore. You have an ATM, you don't really need to go in for much else. You can do everything digitally. And so with that, with the loss of bank branches providing the customer relationship and the customer service element of financial services, and that being embedded into software, someone like Toast, who actually were sending people into the restaurant to sell them the system that they use to run their every day-to-day business, by building in payments into that, we had a better relationship. So that's a massive change. If you're not paying attention to what's going on in fintech, there's a ton of innovation in fintech. And now people will say, if you look at the business models of the internet, there's advertising, there's software as a service, and now there's fintech. And people are taking, and by the way, we just copied Square on a lot of what we did. So just to be honest, like we didn't have a lot of new ideas. We just built what Square did for restaurants. So now we're recording. Okay, it's a good thing we just started recording, but but yeah, so they pioneered that model, and now people are saying, we're going to do Toast 4X, and what they might mean is they're going to focus on some vertical. What they also might mean is they're going to embed payments as a business model. And that was totally not the conventional wisdom at the time. We had a lot of people tell us that that'll never work. People do not want to buy their point of sale, coupled together with their payments. They want to be able to shop around for their payments, because payments at the time was a commodity, but we sort of completely uncommoditized that by bundling it in. And then the consumer aspect was another piece. The fact that your phone has now become what we call the remote control of the world. You expect as a consumer to be able to interact with every business or everything and everyone with your phone first, as a mobile first thing. And so all of a sudden things like online order, you mentioned that earlier, being able to order on your phone, or have a QR code for loyalty or a gift card and have that digitized instead of a plastic card you put in your wallet. That's so 2000s, right? We bundled all that in. We built in online ordering from pretty much day one, gift cards, loyalty cards, point of sale payments. We were replacing 5 different software vendors in the restaurants that we were in the first couple of restaurants. And so this opportunity to bundle and for platforms to emerge where there's a whole bunch of point solutions before, I like to think that this is another, if you don't understand this law of technology, which is that of commoditization and bundling, you're like missing out on something really important. And so I always used to talk about the example of spell check. Spell check, you used to buy that separately. I don't know if anybody ever remembers buying spell check separately. You'd buy your word processor, then you'd buy your spell checker, and you'd install the spell checker in the word processor. Well, that didn't last very long, right? All of a sudden, that was a feature that became bundled in. And then word processing itself, if you remember WordPerfect back in the day, that got destroyed because Microsoft came along and said, wait a second, you should buy the whole Office suite. You buy, Excel and Word and PowerPoint and Outlook and all that. And then that's kind of gotten disrupted to an extent by Google Drive, and now that's bundled in, and now you have storage as part of that, and email as part of that, and the whole Google suite that's part of that. And so this is the march of technology. Stuff gets commoditized and bundled in over time. And some of our early competitors, I think, failed to recognize that. And they said, well, we'll just do POS, point of sale devices for restaurants in the cloud on iPads. which was fine. It was taking advantage to those trends, but they didn't bundle in payments, and they didn't bundle in everything else, all the consumer online ordering and gift card and other modules that we had. And so I think they just failed to recognize that march of technology is that towards commoditization bundling. So that was the 4 trends that I think we followed, and it really helped us a lot to be at the intersection of all those.
Totally, yeah. Now, it's really exciting to have Toast based right here in Boston. So why have you, as a tech entrepreneur, chosen to base yourself here, and how has being in Boston shaped the way that you launched Toast?
Well, like I think someone else said, VCs will give you advice, and the example, you can't do a startup and a PhD at the same time. Sometimes that's kind of motivating, right? When someone tells you what you can't do. Somebody else gave me advice once. They said, the trick with advice is to understand which 5 or 10% of the advice that you get is actually relevant and which is garbage and you should ignore. But it's kind of tricky because you're talking to people like venture capitalists and other entrepreneurs that in theory are smarter than you or have more experience than you, but a lot of them give you bad advice. We got a lot of bad advice from VCs who didn't invest and then are kicking themselves now. But so finding your own path is okay, and then actually using that to motivate you can be fine too. I always think this idea of you have to go to Silicon Valley to do anything big. I had this sort of desire to prove that wrong. And in part, my family's from Massachusetts. My wife's family was from Massachusetts. We were sort of rooted here. But my network was also here too. I spent 6 years or 7 years before I started Toast at a company called Endeca. I joined them because I said, this company's growing 100% a year. It's a rocket ship startup. I want to learn. And I learned a ton. And I certainly would advise anyone else who wants to learn to go join a fast growth company. I think there's a lot of value you get out of seeing what success looks like from the inside and then being able to pattern match when you go and do your own thing. But the other thing that we got out of that is a huge network. I spent a lot of times those 6 years at Endeca just meeting everybody I could. And it was somewhat intentional because I knew I wanted to start a company one day. I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn about how the rest of the company worked. So I talked to other executives there, other employees there in other departments. I rotated through a lot of different positions when I was there as well. But that also gave me a network. And so when we then started Toast, I think probably most, if not all, of the early engineers that we hired were all former Endeca employees. Some of them had gone and done their own startup and then had failed and then realized that it was tough to do a startup and maybe they could join one that was having some traction, and we were, but they already didn't want to go back to a big company, right? So that was actually a pretty good recruiting pool of talent for us early days, is people we knew, people that had gone to startups. We knew they knew what startups were like. We knew they were ready for that startup pace and lifestyle and risk level. But their existing startups hadn't worked. And so there's definitely some recycling of talent that happens in the ecosystem and in the network. And so whether you're just networking at events like this and meeting the other startup folks, like that's a really good network to know, or meeting people inside of a larger company that might become collaborators, co-founders. Two of my co-founders, the 3 of us as co-founders, all came from Endeca. We'd all worked together for many years, actually. I think 6 or 7 years with me and Aman, which is really also important because doing a startup's like getting married, right? It's a relationship. It has to last a long time, and startups fail because of founders break up, and that's one of the biggest causes of startup failure. And so getting to know your co-founders first for a long time is really valuable, and we got that at Endeca. So it just made a lot of sense for all sorts of reasons. Our network was in Boston, our families were in Boston, to stay here, and then it was just a matter of proving everybody wrong.
So Steve, we have one last question for you. What advice might you have for young entrepreneurs who are just starting out?
Yeah, well, one thing I think that's super valuable, and I think I heard it in one of the last panel AMAs as well, is talk to customers. And this was advice I got from a venture capitalist as well. They said, well, why don't you come back with some traction? And they said, why don't you go and get some letters of intent from a bunch of customers that they want to buy this thing that you're pitching? And we didn't have any lawyers and we didn't know what the letter of intent was, but I think they said LOI. What's an LOI? What is an LOI? Okay, it's a letter of intent. But what we did do is we ended up instead saying, well, let's create a customer advisory board and let's go sign up 10 different restaurants to be on our customer advisory board. And they don't have to buy the software, but they have to help us tell us what they want it to look like. And in exchange, we'll give it to them for free for 12 months, or I don't even know if we set up a boundary. We just said, we'll give it to you for free in exchange for being on our customer advisory board. And you don't have to buy it, no obligation, but if you want it, it's free. That worked really well because it was basically selling to customers something that didn't exist yet, because people vote with their time. No one's going to spend a couple hours with you to be an advisor on your customer advisory board if they're not excited about what you're doing, if they don't think it has value to them as a business themselves or as a user themselves. And so people vote with their time, and time is often more valuable and harder to get than money, in fact. And so that was a really valuable lesson. And for me, like, I read the Lean Startup and they say go build an MVP. It's all great, but it takes a lot of time to build an MVP. It's expensive. You got to have engineers. You got to spend a lot of time and money to build something. I would say it's by far easier to go talk to customers, go talk to 20 customers, go talk to 100 prospective customers about what they need, and go ask them about what the top 3 priorities that they have are. Because if you're not in the top 3 priorities for someone's business, and if you don't help solve one of their top 3 priorities, it's really hard to sell. And the reason why we were able to have such great unit economics in our business and such attractive financials when we raised money, we had very attractive numbers, is because we were solving a real need for the restaurant. They were using the system every day, but it was built, the systems they were using were built in the 1990s. They were really old. They were hard to use. They were painful to use. They broke a lot. Their service was bad because the company's really old and sort of legacy. And so there was pain. There was very real pain. And we were one of their top 3 priorities to solve that pain. And that made a big difference. And then the fact that we could monetize through payments gave us a huge revenue stream that made the payback periods on sales and marketing really high. But if you're not a top 3 priority, it's really hard. It's really hard to rise above the noise. And so how do you find that out? You go talk to your prospective customers. We were really lucky that we knew exactly who our customers were going to be. Restaurants. We said, we're only going to sell to restaurants. And we did that because Square was horizontal. And we said, we can't compete against Square head on with the same strategy as them. We need to find a niche, and let's pick restaurants as a really big vertical. Groupon had risen and fallen restaurants and showed us just how large restaurants could be, how big a business you could build within the restaurant industry, but also how underserved they were by modern technology, whether it was for marketing or for their core ordering systems. And so we said, all right, let's focus on restaurants, and now let's go talk to restaurants. We would go door to door on nights and weekends, Aman and I, and the reason it was nights and weekends because he was still working full-time at Oracle, splitting his salary 3 ways under the table. That's how we started the company. That's how we bootstrapped it. And he doesn't like to talk about that, but there's nothing illegal about it, by the way. It was all kosher in that regard. It was questionably legal, but I'm pretty sure it was actually legal. When we look back at it, we didn't know if it was legal or not, so that's why Aman doesn't like to talk about it. But so we go around nights and weekends, and we just go door to door, and we talk to restaurant owners, and we got shown out of the door a lot, and we got a lot of no's before we started pitching something that all of a sudden people said, wow, yeah, I want to talk about that. By the way, we were originally pitching mobile payments, and you'd walk into 20 restaurants and you'd be lucky you'd get one restaurant owner to spend 2 minutes with you as you followed them around the restaurant as they went about their day, pulling food out of the, off the trucks or talking to the kitchen staff or whatever, preparing for the service. It just wasn't a good idea. I mean, it's not a good idea when you can barely get anybody to talk to you about it. But as soon as we started saying, well, what if we built a new modern POS system? All of a sudden, you'd talk to 20 restaurant owners, you'd go door to door and ask, to try to speak to the owner. And you get a lot of people that you would talk to you. And they'd come to Aman's basement for 2 hours and they'd print out pages and pages. We literally had a stack of like 50 or 100 pages of reports that came out of their old system. They just build this one. And they were excited about it. And they'd come back again to talk to us again. And then they tested it when we had something to test. So that customer driven development, like you don't have to build anything, but you do need to talk to customers. And if you build something, you don't talk to enough customers, the likelihood that you get that wrong, and it's a fairly expensive mistake because you spend a lot of time building it. That's what we did. We spent 3 months building a mobile payments app that nobody wanted. We should have just talked to customers about it. In hindsight, we made the decision to have me and my co-founder, our CTO, go full time while Aman was splitting his salary 3 ways, because we thought building something was the most important, and we were the 2 better engineers. But in fact, talk to customers, which was Aman's superpower, and he's run sales and marketing now, and ended up being a very effective salesperson and sales leader. We undervalued that at the time, and I think so. I would say talk to customers, figure out who your customer is, and make sure you spend enough time talking to customers.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for joining us. It's truly inspiring to hear about your journey.
So much.